Hi everybody, and welcome back to our series on early learning. This is in fact the last video in this series, and I want to thank you all so much for the incredible support that I've received in putting together this series. The videos have reached a much wider audience than I had ever anticipated, and I'm just so excited to see the importance that is being placed on early childhood development. Now, even though this is the last video in this series, we won't stop making videos here at ChildPsych. From next week, we shift our focus slightly so we don't look so much at cognitive and physical aspects of development, but we are going to be focusing more on some of the emotional aspects of children's development and how that relates to their schooling as well. This final video is on fine motor control, and it's an area that I think we need to specifically have a look at because I find that it's increasingly more neglected, not only by parents but also sometimes by schools. And the reason for shifting the focus away from fine motor control is often that parents or teachers will say, you know, fine motor control really only relates to your penmanship and handwriting. And as we are moving more and more into a digital age, children are probably going to be writing less and less and using computers and keyboards to type up their work. Now that is definitely true. I am pretty sure that in the future we will see a big shift towards digital in schools. But for a few reasons, it's important to never neglect fine motor control, and I'll tell you what some of these reasons are. The first and most obvious for me is that we're not quite there yet. We haven't quite shifted to that digital space. And at the moment, in most schools, the primary way for children to not only make notes, but also to give an indication of what they have learned in exams and in tests is via handwriting. The second important point is that I don't think we will ever see this shift happening in the foundation phase, maybe from grade 4 onwards. But the reason for that is that a multisensory experience is so important for helping to learn information. And so in learning what letters and words look like, it's really important for children to also write them and get that tactile feedback of what does it feel like, the proprioception even of where is my hand going in relation to my elbow or my shoulder as I draw this letter. And the third reason is that it is actually incorrect to say that fine motor control only relates to handwriting and to penmanship. In fact, your child will use fine motor skills in almost every single thing that they do on a daily basis, from brushing their teeth, to getting dressed, to feeding themselves, to all of the cutting and pasting and art activities that they will be doing at school. So let's look at some of the ways that you can actually incorporate fine motor control in your child's everyday activities. So like I've mentioned, things like buttoning up their buttons, using zips, tying their shoelaces while they get ready. Try as far as possible to encourage your child to be independent in getting dressed. And also in terms of feeding, whether your child is using his fingers or whether he's using utensils, encourage him to feed himself as often as possible, even though with younger kids that might be quite a messy experience. And then also activities that they will do on a regular basis if they are going to a pre-primary school or a play school would probably include things like coloring and drawing and painting. Those are all fantastic for fine motor control. And while we are chatting about drawing and coloring, I wanted to focus for a second with you on pencil grasp. Again, I so often get told by parents, I don't really care how he holds his pencil. I mean, I can see what he's writing and that's all that I'm happy with. And that is an important point. So pencil grasp does have a lot to do with legibility of handwriting. But that again is not the only reason that we want your child to have a specific type of pencil grasp. So let me just grab my pencil and I'll tell you why it's important. Oops, I can't find it, so I'm just going to use a chopstick. But you'll still get the idea. So I'm going to get closer to the camera to show you what the ideal pencil grip looks like. This is what we call an open tripod grasp. So if I show you that, you will see that this web space is open. And also, if I say tripod, it means that 3 of my fingers are in touch with the pencil. There are some other grasps that can also be functional, but I want to show you what contributes to a grip that's not functional. So firstly, if this web space is closed up, often because children will wrap their thumb over or under their index finger, what happens is that you really don't have a lot of movability. You can't really move your fingers much. The same happens when you have more than one finger on the pencil. And what happens is that your fingers actually stiffen up in an incorrect grasp. So you are not writing with your fingers, but you are in fact writing with your shoulder or your elbow. Now, quite often this doesn't present as a major problem in the early years. Where it does start to trip children up is in the later years, because at high school level, it takes so much more effort to be writing with your shoulder or your elbow that we find children become very slow in note-taking or in completing their exams. And usually by this stage, it is too late to try and change that pencil grasp. That's why it's so important that we focus on it in the early years. Okay, so that was the tip in terms of pencil grasp. Then I want to have a look at some ways in which you can use household items to improve your child's fine motor control. Now, throughout the series, you know that I've really had a big preference for household activities. And there are 3 reasons for this. The first is that it's a lot more cost effective if you can just use things you already have. The second is that I find you are much more likely to actually do an activity if it doesn't take a lot of time to set up. So often I have the absolute best intentions, but I just don't get around to doing an activity with children because I haven't had a chance to go to the toy store or stop at the stationery shop to get some of the elements that I need. And the third reason is that it's much better for the environment to reuse the things that we already have instead of manufacturing and shipping and buying new things. Some of the ways in which you can use household items in fine motor control with activities with your children are the following. So whenever you order or buy something, you're quite likely to get bubble wrap. Never ever throw bubble wrap away until you've given your children a chance to pop all of these bubbles. And that usually keeps them entertained for hours. The same thing goes if you want to talk about packaging for things like tissue paper. Tissue paper is really, really wonderful for teaching children to tear things into strips. Now, tearing is a particularly difficult activity because you have to use both fingers, or the fingers on both hands, firstly to pinch, and secondly, you are pulling with one hand and pushing away from your body with the other. So I find that it takes children a while before they can really learn to tear. And once you've taught them to tear, the next thing you want to do is teach them to roll this tissue paper into little balls. Again, fantastic for all the little fine motor muscles in the hands and the wrists. But then also you can use these little tissue balls afterwards for activities and to make arts and crafts. Then, so nuts and bolts are amazing as well. If you've got a little one who's very interested in the garage and everything that's happening in dad or grandpa's garage. So this is a set that I bought, but the real thing will work just as well. Just make sure that it's big enough for your child to actually be able to manipulate the nuts and the bolts. Then also an activity like painting nails, not just for girls, boys can paint nails as well, requires quite fine work to make sure that you don't really paint over the nail. And also, if you are brave enough, you can let your children do your hair or your makeup, as that's also amazing for fine motor control. And washing pigs, you will all know from watching my previous videos that I am a big fan of washing pigs because you can use them in such a big variety of ways. But just having to pinch that pig to make it open up and close up again is amazing fine motor work. What you could do is to string just a piece of string across a wall perhaps in your child's room and then use washing pigs for them to hang up their art. Not only again is that a good activity, but it also gives them a little bit of control and choice as to the decoration that they want to have in their room. You can also use droppers. So you can buy the medicinal droppers that you get from pharmacies. This actually comes from a beauty product. I don't know if you can see it. And it's a night serum, because I'm getting a bit old, that has a dropper, and you can fill these with food coloring and have your child create beautiful pictures. Another tip is to not always just give them a piece of paper, horizontally in front of them to work down onto when they're creating crafts. You might want to sometimes stick a piece of paper onto the wall, or even have them lie underneath a table and stick the piece of paper on the bottom of the table, because now you're engaging the shoulder grid and some of the bigger muscles a little bit more, even the core if you're lying down and having to draw. And then threading, beading, fantastic for fine motor control. The one thing that I find with especially very little ones is that threading is a bilateral task, in that one hand has to manipulate the material while the other manipulates the thread or the needle. And often I find that if the material that they're working on is too soft, they kind of go all awry and they can't really focus on what they're doing. So styrofoam, like your old styrofoam containers that you buy fresh produce in, is a really fantastic medium for children to thread on because it's solid. It's not going to move as they work in it. And if you can use this styrofoam, for instance, I don't know if you guys remember the abacus that we made. This is a really great medium to make that abacus in. And of course, your kitchen is absolutely filled with fine motor activities. You could use a colander with some pipe cleaners, if you might have them, and have your child stick those in and through the holes. Spaghetti works just as well, so you can get them to actually stick spaghetti through. Tinned food. So what I have here is just a tin of chickpeas and some random rubber bands. And the activity of having to put that rubber band around the tin really works the fine motor muscles as your child stretches out the rubber band. I don't know if you have seen all those videos going around of people putting rubber bands around watermelons until they eventually burst. Now, I know most of you are already cringing because you could just imagine what a mess that must make. But if you ever find yourself on a hot outdoor day with a couple of rubber bands and a watermelon in the vicinity, I can almost guarantee that your children would love that activity. Also, toothpicks, something we all have at home. So you can use toothpicks with jelly tots or marshmallows to create different shapes. I actually didn't have any jelly tots or marshmallows, so I thought I would just give this a try with some of the Fruit Loops that I had left from last week's video. And it actually worked absolutely wonderfully. So you can use Fruit Loops as well. then you don't always have to set up an activity for them in the kitchen. Even if you just get them involved in making food, things like peeling fresh vegetables, for instance, or grating cheese or mashing some potato is amazing for fine motor control. Also, transferring activities. So a transfer activity would be anything where you transfer something from one bowl to a next. And to demonstrate, I've just got some popcorn, unpopped popcorn in here. But you can use just about anything to transfer. So with little ones, you want to start with using a spoon and a big spoon. Give them either a serving spoon or a tablespoon before you move on to a smaller utensil, like a teaspoon, for instance. And as your children become more advanced, you can also give them tongs. Now, tongs will not help to pick up, the popcorn, but you can give them things like toys or Lego or just slightly bigger things to pick up. Tongs, by the way, are a fantastic way to encourage your children to tidy up. So when you find that they're getting a little bit tardy at packing up and tidying up, I'll often change up the activity by giving the children tongs and saying to them that I want to see who can pick up the most items within a specific time. So remember that one as well. Chopsticks. Now, chopsticks are difficult to manipulate, so only as your children get older would I suggest that you introduce chopsticks for them. And whether it's for eating or just transferring things like macaroni, for instance, or if they're really good, you can give them rice to transfer. And then lastly, there we go. When they get very, very good, give them a tweezer to transfer things with. Now, transferring a big bowl of rice with a tweezer can be extremely tiring. So remember that if you are going to give your child this kind of intensive fine motor activity, make it short. Just set the timer for a minute to see how many items they can move within a minute. And so we have come to the end of this video and ultimately the end of this entire series. Again, thank you so much for being so fantastic in this journey and in your support. Now, we are not going away. We are just going to shift our focus, like I've said, somewhat from the cognitive and physical aspects onto emotional aspects. And next week, I want to look specifically at emotional readiness to learn and what it means to be emotionally school ready. I so look forward to seeing you all there next.